everybody, this is Kevin, and welcome back to another anime review. And today I'm going to begin my JoJo's Bizarre Adventure review series, going through all 6 parts of the anime. Of course, this is a very popular manga series from Hirohiko Araki, which began back in 1987, and is still ongoing, with Part 9 having just started a few weeks ago. But as of right now, we just have the first 6 parts adapted in the anime, and I'm sure at some point we'll get Part 7, 8, 9, and if there's a Part 10 and onward. But anyway, today we're going to go over Part 1, Phantom Blood. This Blu-ray has Part 1, Phantom Blood, and Part 2, Battle Tendency. And I actually recorded a video discussing both of them. But the thing is, it just went pretty long-winded. There's a lot to cover, so I figured, we'll just lay out the groundwork with Part 1, and then next week we'll cover Part 2. And then after that, go through each Blu-ray, because after Part 2, they get a little longer. For instance, Part 3 is 48 episodes, and it's split into 2 Blu-rays. So, a lot of ground to cover. Now, this is going to be very spoiler-heavy, because I can't really talk about the plot, especially Phantom Blood only being 9 episodes, without spoiling things, character deaths, and whatnot. So, if you haven't seen JoJo's for whatever reason, go watch it. Do not listen to people saying, skip Part 1 and 2, just go to Part 3, because that's when the stands appear. If you do that, how are you going to appreciate older Joseph in Part 3 and Dio in Part 3 if you don't even know who Dio is? So watch Part 1 and Part 2. Do not listen to the people saying that these parts are boring, because it's far from that, especially Part 1 especially. I mean, 9 episodes, it's really fast. But anyway, so this is my spoiler discussion. You have been warned. Now, the cool thing about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is each part follows a new member of the Joestar family with some returning characters in other parts. And it takes place at a different period in time. Part 1 takes place in the 1880s. I believe it's 1888 to be exact. And then Part 2, 1930s, and then so on and so forth. It keeps progressing in time, with Part 1 being Jonathan Joestar, right here. And then Part 2 being Joseph Joestar, his grandson. So I love how they, follow a new character of each part, but also have returning characters. I thought that was a nice touch. And very, very cool to spot out all the Easter eggs and references and whatnot throughout. So it starts with quite a hook, where there's wreckage, and you see this woman die protecting her son, who turns out to be Jonathan Joestar, and then George Joestar lying there, seemingly dead, when this guy, Dario Brando, shows up, trying to steal all the goods, sees this ring on George's finger, which he's like, oh, I can get a pretty penny for that. And then also noticing a briefcase holding this ominous-looking stone mask, which unlocks Dio's power later on, and then is even more important in Part 2, I suppose. So, of course, George comes to, and is like, oh, Providence has been granted, I've been saved! And, he feels indebted to Dario, so Dario is like, oh, okay, if I let him live, then when he eventually does die, I'll get something out of it. He's trying to think for himself. Which, I don't know, he's knocked out. You would think Dario would just kill him right then and there and just steal everything, right? But he lets him live. And then, of course, that's how Jonathan has to come into the picture, and he survives and grows up. And I gotta say, dude, let's go over the English dub cast real quick. This is set in England, so there's, English-British accents going on, and everyone did such a phenomenal job. We have Johnny Young Bosch, the legend himself, as Jonathan Joestar. Mark Derizen as George Joestar, that's Jonathan's father, and Mark Derizen you might know as Guts from the 1990s Berserk anime, Akiko Kayaba from Sword Art Online, etc. Dario Brando is voiced by Steve Kramer. His son Dio Brando, voiced by Patrick Seitz. Man, he did such a great job as Dio. We have Michelle Ruff as Irina Pendleton, who becomes the love interest for Jonathan. Keith Silverstein as Robert E.O. Speedwagon. And a few others. I guess we'll get to them later on. But that's the thing, too, I should mention. Throughout JoJo's, there are so many references to popular rock groups. As you just heard, Robert E.O. Speedwagon, REO Speedwagon, and then Dio being Dio. And that continues all throughout the series. You gotta love that. So what happens is, some time passes. We see Jonathan as a young adult. And he lives in the wealthy Joestar estate with his father. Just having a grand old time with his dog, Danny, which he's like, Donnie! Such a great job with the accent they had going on. All these friends. You see this girl, Irina, being bullied by two guys, and Jonathan steps in and just starts protecting her, but gets overwhelmed because it's 2 against 1. And Irina's like, what are you doing? Why are you helping me? it's not whether I care about you or not. I have to help a damsel in distress. It's the right thing to do. So right away, you get like this romance between the two of them, which I thought was nice. And, you know, as time passes throughout this, a lot of stuff happens in the very first episode. It shows Dario on his deathbed writing a letter saying, "Hey, Dio, come over here. You're to go to the Joestar estate once I'm dead, because that old whelp George thinks he owes me. So you'll go there and get in there and steal the money that they have." And you see right away that Dio hates his father, and it actually shows his father's gravestone. He's sitting there on his deathbed coughing, and then, you know, he dies. And Dio's, you know, hovering over the gravestone, and he spits on his father's grave. So right away you see, you know, first of all, Dio's father's an asshole, but Dio is an asshole himself. And he's going to sneak his way in there as the new adopted son to the Joestar family and try to usurp the wealth. I also love the language they use there where they say like the word whelp, you wench. Later on, Dio calls Arena a wench. Arena uses the word you old cad, which what the hell does cad even mean? I love the language and using words like that. So yeah, Dio shows up, and right away, you know, Jonathan's all outgoing. "Oh, so good to meet you. How are you, Dio?" And Danny, the dog, comes running up, and Dio kicks the fucking dog right away. And he's like, "You mutt, stay away from me, you old mutt." And it's like, he's kicking a dog? What the hell? Which, something far worse happens to this dog later on in this episode. So, as Dio comes into the family, he pushes all Jonathan's friends away and notices that him and Arena are getting along, and that's sort of like his girlfriend. And as Jonathan bids farewell to Arena, Dio sneaks in and steals the first kiss from Jonathan and Arena. And you see Arena, like, you know, push him away and then washes her mouth out of the water from the creek. And then they go back, and you hear like a banging on the furnace, and it turns out that Dio put Danny, the dog, in the furnace and burnt the dog, killed the dog, burning it alive. So right away in the first episode, if you like Dio, there's something wrong with you, because he pushed Jonathan's friends away, he stole his girl, and then he killed his dog. I mean, holy fuck. And that's something that happens in like every part of JoJo. Something horrific happens to a dog. Which, does Araki hate dogs, or what's the deal with that? I don't know. I think I read somewhere that he does that because it's a way to make you hate the villains more. Which, yeah, it works. Especially to people who own dogs and are dog lovers. So, you know, some time passes, and Jonathan and Dio are on better terms. They're ready to graduate high school. And they win this rugby match, and they're telling their father. But it turns out that George has the same cough that Dario had and is not doing too well. He's been giving medicine. And then Jonathan finds out that Dio is lacing the medicine with poison. So he doesn't kill George, like, overnight. Just give him a high dose of poison, kill him. He's slowly lacing the medicine with poison to kill him slowly, so it's not as suspicious. And Jonathan finds out, takes a sample of the medicine to Ogre Street, which is where he believed it to be sold, to figure out the culprit and figure out if it really is poison, and then has a run-in with these thugs led by Robert E.O. Speedwagon. And what happens is Jonathan defeats them all in battle, and because he didn't kill him, Speedwagon is like, "Oh, you're such a kind, gentle soul," and he agrees to accompany Jonathan, and he becomes his companion. And Speedwagon is such a great character. All throughout this part, he's like the play-by-play commentator. Anytime there's a fight, he's like, "Jonathan just won't give up! Look at Jonathan go! Go, Jonathan!" He's like the commentator in a boxing match or something. I thought it was fucking hilarious. So, he makes his way there, comes back, and then finds that Dio, while this has been going on, has been fooling around with the stone mask, trying to figure out the secrets, and learns that it turns people into vampires. And really, they're mindless vampires. The true way to activate it is to put the blood of the Joestar family on the mask, and then you become a full-fledged vampire. So, he's amazed that Jonathan came back because he sent a vampire after him, but Jonathan defeated him. And then has the evidence and is like, "You try to kill father, what are you doing?" And then George is, "Oh, I took you as a son." And Dio, what he does is ready, he gets a knife ready to kill Jonathan, but George gets in the way, sacrificing himself to save his son. And then George's blood gets on the mask, turning Dio into a fucking vampire. And as this happens, they have this whole, like, it's not a SWAT team. I don't think they had SWAT teams back then, but this whole array of police officers, I guess, just open fire on him, and they shoot Dio out the window, presumably dead. There's the one officer like looking out there. He's like, oh, he's dead. He turns around. Dio sticks his fucking hand through the back of his head and rips half his head off. Like, these deaths in JoJo's, they're as gruesome as the next. It's fucking crazy. All blood and guts everywhere. And Dio's back. He's a fucking vampire. Everyone dies except for Jonathan and Speedwagon. And they had this epic battle in the burning building. However, Jonathan's able to prevail, although Dio doesn't necessarily die. You know, they can't find his body. They think he's dead. They're like burned alive, but no, he's still alive. So after the fight, Speedwagon's trying to nurse him back to health. He's like, how can Jonathan go on? His house burned down, his father dead, his own brother turned against him. What is going on? And then he sees that Arena is taking care of him, trying to cool off the burns and nurse him back to health. And he's like, oh, that's reason enough to live on. So the sweet moment there, Jonathan wakes up, and then he begins his trek. And then all of a sudden, you hear like this, like sound effect, and this crazy dude, Baron Zeppeli, comes flying in, and right away, he's like, and he punches Jonathan right in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him, but using what he calls Hamon, the breathing karate of the JoJo's universe, at least in the first two parts. And he tells him that he's been pursuing the stone mask for decades now. His father died in search of it, and it's his quest to stop Dio and destroy the stone mask once and for all. So he begins training Jonathan in the art of Hamon, and well, after doing that punch too, Jonathan has like a broken arm and it's healed after that. So they begin their training, and some really good shit. They end up going through this tunnel, and they're fighting this Jack the Ripper turned into a vampire. There's lots of references to all these things throughout JoJo. So Dio got Jack the Ripper to turn into a vampire now, and they start fighting him, and Zeppeli out of nowhere has this bottle of wine and a wine glass with him. He pours the bottle of wine into the glass, and he hands it to Jonathan. Jonathan, you will defeat him by holding this glass of wine, and if you spill one drop, I will abandon you here and now. So just like the crazy over-the-top shit going on, and then it like cuts to everyone's face like, oh, like they all have the shocked look on their face. It's so fucking funny, man. So, of course, Jonathan prevails. They make their way, and they run into this boy named Poco, who's looking for his sister. And it turns out that he's being controlled by Dio. He's not a vampire, he's just being like mind controlled. And he leads them to this graveyard as it turns dark. And you see Dio with his dramatic pose, like, oh, Jonathan, to think you're still alive. And then he summons these two dudes, ancient warriors, Bruford and Tarkus, voiced by Tony Oliver and Taylor Henry. And they're like ancient warriors who served under Mary, Queen of Scots. And they start battling, and the one dude, Bruford, he has a sword that he hasn't pulled out yet, and Speedwagon's like, where's he gonna pull the sword? From his right hand? From his left hand? And then Tarkus says, from my hair. And he's got this long hair, and the fucking hair pulls out the sword and starts battling him. It's like, holy shit, dude. So crazy and over the top. Of course, Jonathan wins, and as the fight's over, Bruford turns into a good guy and gives him his sword. It's called Luck, and then he writes Puck on it with his blood and gives it to Jonathan, which he uses later on against Dio in the final battle. So then they get trapped, and Zeppeli is thinking to his past about his mentor, Ton Petty, not Tom Petty, Ton Petty. In the English show, they had to change certain names with the bands, because I guess they couldn't use them. So Ton Petty was his mentor, and had told him that he would have to live long enough to transfer his Hamon to the next worthy opponent. And so he sacrifices himself, gets chopped in two, but transfers all his Hamon to Jonathan to do the Scarlet Overdrive is his new power. And then he defeats Tarkus, and then they have the battle against Dio. Well, before that, Dio dispersed to let his two minions fight, so some time passes. And there's a really disturbing scene with Dio where he's torturing this woman, and he has the woman's baby. And he's like, oh, you don't want me to kill your child, huh? Well, if you turn into a vampire, then we'll spare your child. And he turns this woman into a vampire, and then you see her killing her own child. It's like, that's some fucked up shit, dude. So, in a certain sense, he told the truth. He said he wasn't going to kill her, but he turned her into a vampire, and then she ended up killing her own child. It's like, holy fuck, Dio is one sick bastard. So, eventually they come in contact, well, yeah, they come in, it's like the three Ys of it, I guess. Tom Petty, Dyer, and Straightso, who all show up, and they're like, where the fuck's Zeppeli? Oh, he's dead. Alright, we'll accompany you, Jonathan, for the final battle. And when Dyer shows up, he just appears out of nowhere like, oh, yo, I must test your skills! And he starts fighting Jonathan, and Jonathan thinks he's like a minion of Dio. Oh, man, I thought that was fucking hilarious. So, they end up having the final battle against Dio, where Dyer actually dies. He charges in right away because of all his friends that have died, including Zeppeli, and Dio defeats him. And you sort of learn one of Dio's powers as they use Hamon, because he's a vampire, and against the light and all that, he uses like freezing powers and freezes them. So that's how Jonathan's able to observe this and use it in his battle. And then I think it's Straightso. He has like these roses, which he turned with Hamon. He infused them with Hamon and throws these roses as like arrows. And one of them gets Dio in the eye. Maya! It's fucking great, man. So they have this epic battle. And, dude, how do you word this? Like, Dio sticks his hand into Jonathan's neck and, like, pulls out his artery, his vein. That shit really creeps me out and queases me. Like, I had to turn away watching that. And that happens later on in part 2 with the veins. Like, ugh, that just grosses me out. And he's like, I'm gonna rip your artery in two right now. And then they start battling, and, you know, Jonathan's one arm is frozen. And there's a great quote from Dio where Jonathan's like, gets ready to fight again, and Dio's like, the let's do battle stance? You can't be serious, Jonathan. It's useless, 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 useless! And he says useless so many times so fast while progressively getting louder. It's so fucking good. And he says, you are but a mere monkey, JoJo. A mere monkey could never defeat a lion. He starts battling him. It's so fucking good. But eventually, Jonathan is able to overcome using his Scarlet Overdrive Hamon, and basically hits him so hard, his head gets severed and destroyed, and his brain. That was the whole thing. They had to like destroy his brain. That's the only way you can kill the vampires, by taking out his brain. However, one of Dio's minions, Wang Chen, is able to uncover the head, and Dio is still alive as a head. So they prevail. Everyone goes their separate ways, and Jonathan and Irina are on a boat headed to New York. And there's another quote from Speedwagon where he's like, "Oh, I wish I could have said farewell to them. Oh, may you have many decades of happiness." And I'm just thinking, oh, if only he knew how bad it was gonna be. And what happens is they're on the boat, but Dio's coffin is on the boat with Wang Chen, who has the head and has infected one person on the boat as a vampire, who's infected another, and before you know it, the whole boat's full of vampires. There's again another final battle with Dio, just as a head, and he acknowledges the power of Jonathan and says, "I must use your body now, Jonathan. We'll become one." And you know, Jonathan ends up sacrificing himself to defeat Dio once and for all, or so we think. Part 3 says otherwise. And before he goes, you know, he tells Irina he loves her. And before all that happened, there's this other woman who turned into a vampire who was holding a child. And Irina is also pregnant, by the way. But he tells Irina, you know, give birth to our child, our son, and then take that little girl, too. Who, stay tuned for part 2. So it ends like that. And also shows you in Mexico this pillar with another stone mask, which that's the other thing too. Before they went on the boat, Speedwagon had the sledgehammer and he destroyed the stone mask. But the final episode, episode 9, ends with them showing the this other mask, which is the first Pillar Man from part 2. So anyway, it was fucking awesome, man. Let me get to some screenshots now and just show you some of the stuff, like just the way the characters look, so over the top, the hairdos, everything about it was great, man. Do not listen to people saying that part 1 and part 2 are skippable. You gotta watch them. It's so good. Here's Jonathan and you know, young Dio. All right, early on. This this is Baron Zeppeli teaching him with Arena. Here's one of his attacks. Like, JoJo's has the crazy over the top attacks and all that. The final battle against Dio, remembering all those who sacrificed himself. Zeppeli, his father George, and then Buford, who turned good. And just like the poses, these are all taken from the shots in the manga, of course. So iconic. Yeah, he used the sword and like cuts him in half. So good, man. And then as the ship blows up, you know, he embraces Arena. What's this one here? Yeah, that, like, this shit really creeps me. Like, the veins and stuff, it just makes me queasy, man. Dio's head attacking him, like, fucking hell. So you have Dio. Again, here's, like, his iconic pose. Right, where he's just standing there. And everyone makes fun of JoJo's, how it's gay, because they have the flamboyant designs, and, I mean, they do, but it's fucking awesome, man. Look at them go. So they have their great fights. Here's Dio's severed head. George Joestar, right? He gets the knife in the back, and there you go. There's Dario, like, take this letter to George. This is Dio. He spits on his father's grave, man. Arena. I gotta say, you know, everyone goes on about how. Well, actually, I can't go much farther because that's spoilers for part 2. But I gotta say, like, the few waifus that are in JoJo's are pretty cute. They are, I think, anyway. Oh yeah, there's Dio stealing the first kiss. That fucking bastard. And she's washing it out in the creek. And this is her nursing Jonathan back to health. Here's Baron Zeppeli. Just look at him go, man. Oh man, his entrance was so good. That's his entrance. He just like literally shows up like, oh yeah. Doing these crazy sound effects, punching the wind out of him with his pinky. It was just his pinky. I forgot about that. Oh, man. Here's his battle against Dio. Here's Speedwagon. Again, I'm kind of showing spoilers for part 2 a little bit, but that's him destroying the stone mask. Here's Buford, which... This scene was so hilarious. Which hand will he use to wield his sword? His hair! His hair's wielding the sword. Oh my god. And yeah, here's Dyer, Tom Petty, and Straits. So of course, Tom Petty, and then Dyer Straits, right? So, there you go. So yeah, I very much enjoyed part 1, Phantom Blood. I will say, though, part 2 is even better. So if you watch this review and you're like, that sounds crazy, stay tuned for my review of part 2 because, in my opinion, it's even better and quite possibly has the best JoJo, Joseph Joestar, who is the grandson of Jonathan. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and stay tuned next week for my review of part 2, Battle Tendency. Have a great day, guys.